Baghdad International Airport, January 3, 2020, 12:47 a.m. local time. A convoy of 2 vehicles moves through the darkness just outside the airport perimeter. Inside one of those vehicles sits one of the most surveilled, most hunted, and most consequential military figures of the 21st century. He has just stepped off a flight. He does not know that somewhere above him, invisible in the night sky, a remote-controlled aircraft has already locked onto his position. The targeting sequence is complete. The authorization has been given not by a battlefield commander, not by a military tribunal, not by any court of law, by a single phone call from the Oval Office. Moments later, laser-guided Hellfire missiles obliterate the convoy. Qasem Soleimani, Iranian Major General, commander of the Quds Force, and the architect of Iran's military reach across the Middle East is gone. The US government called it decisive. They called it defensive. They called it justified. But if you look at what the intelligence files actually reveal, if you examine what was known when it was known and what was never told to the public, the picture that emerges is far more complicated, far more dangerous, and far more troubling than any official press release let on. This is what really happened. To understand the weight of January 3, 2020, you need to understand who Qasem Soleimani actually was, not the version presented in a Department of Defense press release, but the full documented, intelligence-verified portrait of a man who spent over 2 decades reshaping the Middle East while the world watched. Soleimani was born in 1957 in a small village in Kerman Province, Iran. He rose through the ranks of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps during the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s, earning a reputation not for recklessness, but for precision, strategic patience, the willingness to play a long game when others wanted immediate results. In 1998, he was appointed commander of the Quds Force, the IRGC's elite external operations unit, responsible for unconventional warfare, intelligence operations, and the cultivation of proxy forces across the region. What he built over the following 2 decades was, by any intelligence assessment, extraordinary in its scope. He was the primary architect of what became known as the Axis of Resistance, a network of armed proxy groups stretching from Lebanon to Yemen to Iraq to Syria. Hezbollah, the Houthis, Iraqi militia groups operating under the Popular Mobilization Forces umbrella, forces propping up Bashar al-Assad's regime in Syria. Within Iran, he was not merely a general. He was a symbol. Polls consistently showed him as one of the most popular figures in Iranian public life. Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei called him a living martyr. He appeared on billboards. His name was spoken with reverence. According to declassified U.S. Mace intelligence assessments, the CIA had been tracking Soleimani for years. They knew his patterns, his travel routes, his communication methods. They knew he moved between Damascus, Beirut, Tehran, and Baghdad with a frequency that made him simultaneously one of the most powerful and most exposed figures in the region. The official U.S. government position, announced in the immediate aftermath of his killing, was straightforward. Soleimani was actively planning imminent attacks against American personnel and diplomats across the region. The Pentagon called it a decisive defensive action to protect U.S. personnel abroad. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo went on television and said the threat was imminent. The word imminent was used again and again. That was the resolved version. That was what they told the public. If you believe the system should be held accountable, if you believe the public deserves the full truth about decisions made in its name, hit the like button right now and subscribe so we can keep exposing these hidden cases. This channel exists because someone has to ask the questions the official narrative refuses to answer. Now, let's talk about what the evidence actually shows. Because here is where the official narrative begins to fracture. The word imminent carries enormous legal and constitutional weight. Under the laws of armed conflict, under international law, and under the specific frameworks governing targeted killing operations authorized by U.S. executive authority, the use of lethal force outside an active battlefield requires a finding of imminence. It means the threat is not speculative, not historical, not anticipated somewhere in the future. It means an attack is coming soon, specifically, concretely. What they didn't tell the public was that senior members of Congress, including members of the Senate Intelligence Committee, who are legally entitled to receive classified briefings on exactly this kind of operation, stated publicly and on the record that the classified briefing they received from the Trump administration did not actually establish a specific imminent threat. Democratic Senator Tim Kaine called the briefing probably the worst he had received in his time on the committee. Republican Senator Mike Lee, a conservative Utah Republican with a strict constitutional lens, emerged from the same classified briefing visibly angry and stated that it was the most insulting and demeaning briefing he had received in his 9 years in the Senate. He said the administration told lawmakers they should not debate or discuss the matter publicly. That is not the behavior of an administration confident in the legal sufficiency of its evidence. Furthermore, internal communications later reviewed by journalists and published by major outlets revealed that the intelligence assessment around an imminent attack was contested within the intelligence community itself. According to reporting by the New York Times citing current and former officials, the evidence of imminent threat was described by some analysts as razor thin. The four-country plotting referenced by administration officials alleged plans to attack U.S. embassies in 4 separate nations was later walked back by the administration itself, with officials including Secretary of Defense Mark Esper stating on record that he had not personally seen specific evidence of a 4-embassy plot. Read that again. The Secretary of Defense said he had not seen the specific evidence that the President of the United States cited publicly as justification for a killing that brought 2 nations to the edge of war. The body cam footage doesn't lie. In this case, the evidence trail doesn't lie either. But the fractures in the official story go deeper than the imminence debate, because what the classified record reveals and what the public record increasingly confirms is a pattern of decision-making that was not primarily driven by a specific, time-sensitive intelligence finding. It was driven by escalation, by retaliation, by the logic of a pressure campaign that had been building for months. Here is what the timeline actually shows. In the weeks before the strike, Iran-backed militia groups in Iraq had carried out a series of rocket attacks against bases housing U.S. troops. One of those attacks, on December 27, 2019, killed an American contractor named Rez Hamid. The Trump administration immediately blamed Soleimani and the Quds Force-linked militia Kataib Hezbollah. 3 days later, the U.S. conducted airstrikes against Kataib Hezbollah positions in Iraq and Syria, killing 25 fighters. Iran-aligned groups responded by organizing a siege of the U.S. Embassy compound in Baghdad, an event that drew immediate comparisons in Washington to the 1979 hostage crisis and generated intense political pressure on the administration to respond forcefully. According to reporting by the Wall Street Journal, the option to target Soleimani directly had been presented to President Trump multiple times in the preceding months and had been rejected as too escalatory. After the embassy siege, the calculation changed. The strike was not the product of a newly discovered plot. It was a political decision made in the context of domestic pressure, a re-election environment, and a desire to demonstrate strength. The Pentagon has confirmed that no specific timeline for an alleged imminent attack was ever publicly released. No court reviewed the targeting decision. No independent body verified the intelligence. A single individual, the President of the United States, made the call based on intelligence that his own Secretary of Defense could not fully confirm, citing a threat that members of his own party with full security clearances described as inadequately substantiated. And what happened next? What happened when the missiles struck? Iran launched ballistic missiles at Al-Assad Air Base in Iraq, the largest military retaliation Iran had conducted against American forces in decades. Over 100 American service members were later diagnosed with traumatic brain injuries from the blasts. The Iraqi parliament voted to expel all foreign troops from its soil. The U.S.-Iran nuclear diplomacy, already fragile, collapsed entirely, and the region held its breath for weeks, genuinely uncertain whether the next move would trigger a full-scale war. This is the human cost that never made the official press release. Think about the families of those American service members who suffered traumatic brain injuries at Al-Assad. People who were told initially by the administration that no one was hurt, that everything was fine, that Iran's response had been successfully managed. They watched press conferences where officials minimized what had happened, Some of them were still being treated for neurological symptoms months and years later, their conditions serious enough to require medical evacuation and extended rehabilitation. The administration initially called them headaches. Think about the Iraqi civilians and officials who woke up on January 3, 2020, to learn that the United States had conducted a targeted killing on Iraqi soil without informing the Iraqi government in advance. Prime Minister Adel Abdul-Mahdi confirmed publicly that he had not been told the strike was coming. Iraq, a sovereign nation with whom the United States had a formal military partnership and basing agreement, was not consulted about a military operation carried out on its territory that killed not only Soleimani but also Abu Mahdi al-Mohandis, a man who held an official position within the Iraqi state apparatus as deputy commander of the Popular Mobilization Forces, a formally recognized Iraqi paramilitary structure. The Iraqi government did not just protest diplomatically, they voted. The Iraqi parliament passed a resolution demanding the withdrawal of all foreign forces. That vote was not a footnote, it was the sovereign response of a government that felt violated by an ally acting unilaterally on its soil. And think about what was lost in the broader human calculus. Whatever your view of Soleimani and the evidence of his role in attacks that killed Americans and civilians across the region is documented and real, his removal did not dismantle the networks he built. The Quds Force has a new commander. The proxy networks continue to operate. The Houthis continued to fire missiles. Hezbollah remains armed. The axis of resistance did not collapse. What did collapse was any remaining diplomatic channel, any remaining space for negotiation. The system failed not just one family, not just one community. It failed the possibility of a different future. And here is what makes this case matter beyond the specific facts of January 3, 2020. What we are looking at is the fully documented operation of a system that has constructed for itself near total immunity from accountability. The targeted killing program expanded dramatically after September 11, 2001. There were a series of executive authorizations that were themselves classified has resulted in the deaths of thousands of individuals, combatant and civilian alike, across Pakistan, Yemen, Somalia, Libya, Iraq, Syria, and Afghanistan. The legal frameworks justifying these strikes were written in secret, reviewed in secret, modified in secret. And for years, the government refused to even confirm the program existed. The Soleimani strike is the highest profile visible tip of that structure. And it shows us something the classified files underneath have shown analysts for years. The threshold for targeted killing has become whatever the sitting executive decides it is. The word imminent has been stretched, shaped, and redefined through classified legal opinions until it no longer means what the word means in any dictionary. When Senator Mike Lee, a man who has spent his career defending executive power, walks out of a classified briefing and says the administration told Congress not to debate the matter, that is not a partisan statement. That is a constitutional alarm. The power to make war under the U.S. Constitution belongs to Congress. The power to make peace belongs to diplomats. What we saw on January 3, 2020 was neither declared war nor authorized use of force in the traditional sense. It was a unilateral executive action, a targeted killing that carried the consequence of a declaration of war without any of the deliberation. And the accountability mechanisms that should have engaged congressional oversight, judicial review, independent inspector general investigation produced nothing that changed policy, nothing that established a binding standard, and nothing that prevented the same decision architecture from being used again. This is not about whether Qasem Soleimani was a good man. The documented evidence of operations linked to the Quds Force under his command includes attacks that killed Americans, killed civilians, and destabilized entire governments. That evidence is real. This is about the system. The system that kills without trial. The system that classifies its own legal reasoning. The system that tells elected representatives not to ask questions. That system does not protect anyone. That system is the threat. If this investigation has made you think, if you believe the public deserves the full truth about decisions made in its name, with its tax dollars, in its democracy, then hit the like button right now. Share this video with someone who thinks the official story is always the whole story. Leave a comment below. Tell us what question you think never got answered, what detail the press conference left out. Your engagement is what keeps this channel able to research, investigate, and report. And if you are new here, this is what Archives Resolved does. We take cases the headline calls closed, and we open the file. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. A final note on transparency, because this channel believes in it. This investigation is based entirely on public records, declassified intelligence documents, congressional testimony, on record statements by named officials, and reporting by established journalistic outlets including the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and the Associated Press. Where necessary for narrative clarity and flow, certain scenes and timelines have been reconstructed based on available evidence. All research and editorial decisions are human-led. No aspect of this story has been fabricated. The official statements quoted are real. The questions they raise are real. The case is marked resolved. We are not so sure.